Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're tackling something really fascinating that you all sent our way. It's all about privacy
Oh,
and
yeah.
how important it is in this world where, everybody's sharing everything.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into some really interesting questions today, like why is privacy so powerful? And what are the risks when we overshare? And how can we set healthy boundaries without, you know, completely shutting people out?
Yeah, and what's so interesting about this episode that you sent us is that it really makes you kind of flip the script on how we think about privacy.
Yeah.
We always hear sharing is caring and, all that stuff, but
Open.
yeah, be open and vulnerable. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But this source is saying that holding back and, really being careful about what you reveal can actually be a strength.
It's true. And, I've been thinking a lot about that lately, that phrase privacy equals power.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to just kind of brush it off as something vague.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, wait a minute, this applies to so many different areas of life.
Oh, for sure. It's not just about like online safety or, avoiding those embarrassing social media posts. It's bigger than that. It's about realizing that the information we share, the stories that we tell, the vulnerabilities that we expose, those things have value.
Yeah.
And when we just give that value away so easily, it's almost like we're diminishing our own power a little bit,
Right. And it's like giving someone else power in a way, too. Like, if you think about it, even just like in a job negotiation, right?
Mhm.
If you reveal your salary expectations right away, that could put you at a disadvantage.
Oh, totally. You're basically like giving away your leverage before you even start.
Exactly. Or in a relationship,
Right.
right? Imagine just sharing every little detail of your past relationships with your new partner.
Yeah.
That's going to create some baggage.
Yeah, a little mystery can go a long way.
For sure, like in the old movies, the femme fatale, she doesn't reveal everything right.
Right.
There's a reason that archetype is so captivating.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this source really emphasizes that privacy isn't about, being secretive or trying to be aloof. It's about being discerning. It's about choosing what you're comfortable sharing and with who.
Right.
It's about realizing not everybody needs to know, all your deepest, darkest secrets.
Yeah, and I've definitely been there where I've overshared with someone
Yeah.
and then been like, ooh, I wish I hadn't done that.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you spill your guts to someone and they just weren't ready to hear it or they didn't handle it the way you hoped they would.
Yeah, and this episode really gets into the downsides of doing that, oversharing. It's not just about, being worried about what people are going to think about you or getting unwanted advice.
Yeah.
It actually talks about how overexposure can really kind of like erode trust and intimacy in our relationships.
That's really interesting because at the same time, we're constantly told to be more open and more vulnerable and authentic.
Right.
So where's the line? Where do we start? Like, okay, this is healthy vulnerability and this is just too much.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I don't think there's one right answer for everyone. It really is about self-awareness.
Yeah.
Understanding your own boundaries and asking yourself, what feels comfortable for me to share? And, who has actually earned the right to hear this part of my story?
So it's less about having this list of rules and it's more about just kind of tuning into your intuition. Like if something feels off.
Yeah, like a gut feeling.
Yeah, just trust that.
Yeah, exactly. It's about trusting yourself to know when to hold back and when to maybe kind of change the subject,
Okay.
Or even just say, I'm not really comfortable talking about that. You don't owe anyone an explanation for keeping some things private.
Right. It's about, like we said, respecting our own boundaries,
Yeah.
realizing that not everyone needs to know everything about us.
Exactly.
So it's almost like a muscle that we have to develop, that ability to pause before we share and to really ask ourselves, like, is this information really mine to give?
I love that. It's like building a skill. You get better over time.
You do. And what's really interesting is that this episode talks about how setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out or, building walls around ourselves.
Right.
It's a way to actually create healthier, more authentic connections.
It is so, when we overshare, sometimes we're revealing parts of ourselves that we're not even ready to share.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're giving away pieces of ourselves before we've even had the chance to really understand what they mean to us.
It's like handing someone a puzzle piece when we don't even know where it fits in our own puzzle yet.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And that can leave you feeling really exposed.
Yeah.
Vulnerable, even betrayed if the other person doesn't handle it carefully.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But when we set boundaries, we're saying, I'm choosing to share this part of myself because I trust you.
Okay.
I believe you're going to respect it, and I feel safe and comfortable, sharing this with you.
Yeah, and that creates a much deeper connection.
Yes, it does.
Sharing from a place of choice, not from obligation.
Exactly. And that makes all the difference in the world.
Totally.
Hmm.
And, I think what's really cool about all this is that it's empowering because we're recognizing that we have the right to choose what we share.
Yes, we do.
This has been really eye-opening for me already, and I'm starting to rethink some of my own sharing habits.
Me too.
So speaking of habits, I'm curious, what are some practical steps that we can take to actually start protecting our privacy in a world where everybody wants us to share everything?
Right. And that's where this episode you sent us is really great because it has some great actionable advice.
Okay, fantastic.
And we can dig into all that right after this break.
So before the break, we were talking about, the practical side of all this. Like, how do we actually protect our privacy? It's one thing to talk about it, but how do we put it into practice?
Yeah, you're right. It takes effort.
For sure.
And, you kind of have to push back against how our culture is,
Right.
Like we're supposed to overshare.
Exactly.
But there were some really good tips in this episode. One that really stood out to me was just the idea of pausing before you share something. It's so basic, but I think it can be really powerful.
Yeah. Have you tried that yourself?
Oh, yeah, all the time. It gives you a second to think, do I really want to put this out there? Who's going to see it?
Right.
How are they going to use it? Things like that.
Yeah. It's like having that internal filter
Yeah.
instead of just like word vomit.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of just reacting, you're making a choice.
It's like being more mindful.
Exactly. And that choice is where the power comes from.
That makes a lot of sense. So another tip the episode mentioned was about setting boundaries in conversations,
Right.
which can be kind of awkward.
It can.
How do you do that without seeming rude?
Right. It's a balancing act for sure. You want to be open, but you also want to protect yourself.
Yeah.
It's okay to just politely not answer a question or, just change the subject.
Right. Like instead of telling your whole relationship drama to someone you just met at a party,
Oh, God. Yeah.
you talk about like the weather or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or you could just say, I don't really want to talk about that right now.
Yeah. You don't owe anyone an explanation.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
about honoring our own boundaries.
Yeah, for sure.
Not everyone needs to know everything.
Yeah. And, this episode has some really interesting stuff about social media.
Oh, yeah.
It's become such a huge part of our lives, and there's all this pressure to look perfect online.
Oh, it's exhausting.
It is.
Trying to keep up with everyone.
It's like this big popularity contest.
Exactly.
And I think it can really mess with your self-esteem,
Totally. So what do we do about that?
Well, this episode reminds us that we don't have to play that game.
Okay.
We can choose what we share online,
Right.
curate our digital lives a bit more.
So are you saying we should all delete our social media?
No, not necessarily. It's more about being mindful,
Okay.
Like maybe you don't share as much personal information, or you adjust your privacy settings, or you're just more careful about who you're friends with online.
I like that idea. Being more selective about who you connect with. Like not everyone needs to see every single thing you post.
Right. It's like you have different levels of relationships, and those relationships deserve different levels of access to you.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
The episode also talked about trusting your gut,
Oh, yeah.
which is so important when it comes to privacy. Sometimes you just get that feeling like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, you get that little voice in your head, and you should listen to it.
Even if you can't explain it.
Even if you can't explain it, because it's usually based on, years of experience.
Right.
Figuring out who to trust and when to hold back.
I think what I'm really taking away from this episode is that privacy isn't about being secretive or like antisocial.
Yeah.
It's about being in control of how we share our lives with other people.
It is. It's about honoring your own needs,
Yeah.
setting boundaries, and connecting with others in a way that feels authentic.
This has been so insightful. I'm really glad we dug into this.
Yeah, me too.
And we're going to wrap up with some final thoughts after the break. We've been talking all about privacy and why it's so important. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that it's not about being secretive.
Yeah.
It's about self-respect.
I love that. That's a really good way to put it.
Like we get to choose how we share our lives with other people.
Yeah.
It's like having this whole library of experiences, and we're the librarians.
You're the gatekeeper. Yeah.
Exactly. We get to decide who gets to see what.
Right. And not everyone gets access to every room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's tough, right? Because there's this pressure to overshare,
There is.
especially online. Like
Hmm.
we're always being told that being vulnerable will get us more likes or whatever,
Right.
more connection.
But this source makes a really good point. Vulnerability is good.
Yeah,
but it has to be on your own terms.
of course.
Not because you feel like you have to.
You're not obligated to spill your guts to everyone.
Exactly.
And we have the right to protect ourselves,
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely. We don't have to share everything with everybody.
It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between, connecting with people, but also taking care of yourself.
Right. So sometimes that means just taking a step back from all the sharing and
Yep.
being like, okay, do I really need to post this? Or do I just need to think about it for a while?
Be more intentional about.
Exactly.
And the episode talked about how setting boundaries, it takes practice.
Oh, it does. It's like any other skill,
Yeah, you don't just wake up one day and you're like a master of boundaries.
Right. And you're not going to get it right all the time,
For sure.
but that's okay.
It's about learning as you go,
It is.
figuring out what works for you.
And being kind to yourself along the way.
Totally.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth asking ourselves, where do we need to set some stronger boundaries? What areas of our lives could benefit from a little more privacy?
That's such a good question. Is it with your friends? Is it online? At work?
Yeah,
It's different for everyone.
it is. But the important thing is to remember that setting boundaries, it's not selfish.
No, it's self-care.
Yeah,
It's about creating a life where you feel safe and in control.
exactly. And where you can connect with people in a way that feels good for you.
Authentic. Yeah.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the power of privacy.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
We hope you learned something new and are inspired to protect your own privacy a little bit better.
Absolutely.